Okay, so what are we going to be looking at now? The very famous or infamous, up to you, namelist changes. So namelist changes is a feature variable, feature dictionary that has extended functionality for ESM tools and allows you to change the namelist through the run script. So what are namelists? You know what are namelists? Yeah, okay, great.
Configuration files of the code, basically.
Exactly. So it allows you to basically tell the code, your Fortran code, how you're going to be configuring the experiment, declare variables, etc., etc. So ESM tools and some and some codes come with a set of default name lists. And ESM tools takes these name lists either from the name list directory on ESM tools or on the model directory of the code themselves. That depends on the different model and how the developers of that model decided to configure it in ESM tools. But basically it takes these defaults as a template and it parses. And once it parses, then it makes some changes that are specified by the configuration files and by your run script through namelist changes. So you always need a template for that name list. And you can actually change, you can actually point at different templates, you can create your own one, but you always have to think about them as templates because they are going to be modified and they are going to be modified with whatever you have in the configuration files and whatever you have in your run script. Why is this useful? Well, let's say someone has put together an experiment and it's going to call it, okay, this is the run script or this is the experiment under the scenario for pre-industrial control, for example. And they have set everything nicely for you on the template name list so that you can just run straight away a pre-industrial control run. And let's say that you want to run exactly that experiment, but you want to deviate a little bit from it. Maybe you want to change a couple of things on the name lists. Then you can make these changes from the run script. And the advantage of that is if there are not many, if there are many, it doesn't make sense. But if there are not many, then the advantage is that you can just give this run script to someone else and they can reproduce exactly your experiment without needing your own particular name list. So it's all contained, all the changes that you made are contained in the run script. So this is always the aim of when you're using ESM tools, you probably want to aim as much as possible that all the modifications you do from the defaults stay in the run script. Unless you are doing some development for ESM tools, some development for a given configuration, then of course you want to change this on the configuration files and then pull requests into GitHub. But in principle, if you are just deviating from one of the default simulations, that's probably the optimal case. I thought you had your hand raised.
One comment, of course, if you do RVCM3, there is a type of name list for the atmosphere model, which is XML name list, which we currently can't do this for yet. So there you have to make your own copy and change the template until we implement it.
Yeah, we need to add support for that. Okay, so let's look at the syntax. So you are going to be placing the name list inside wherever the name list changes dictionary, inside wherever section you want to be for the model, basically for the section of the model that you want to change the name list for. Okay, so for example, if we want to change the name list on FESOM, we will put this on the run script inside the FESOM section. And what we add is name list changes, name list underscore changes. Then you have to specify the name of the name list. So for example, for FESOM, that would be namelist.config, namelist.io, namelist.whatever. Then you specify the section inside the name list that you want to modify. And then you specify the variables that you want to modify and give them a value. And that would make the changes on your name list. So what ESM tools would do with that, again, is it would parse the template name list, and then it will make the changes, and then it will print this file inside the work folder. So inside, again, inside your experiment folder, in the run folder, and inside the run folder, there is a work folder where all the experiment is actually run.
Question, how do I see which template it uses?
So you have to check, normally it's not a feature variable, but it's not, and we are gonna be doing that on a more advanced exercise. It's not a feature variable, but normally it's defined namelist dir. So you can actually look for the variable namelist dir in the configuration files, and then you see it's probably using multiple variables inside the path. So for example, it will probably use the model version to understand which namelist it has to load from the namelist folder. It might have even a scenario variable, for example, because you can have SSP namelist, you can have historical namelist, basically namelist dir. But something very important is that this is not a feature variable. This variable means nothing to ESM-Tools. The reason why this is working, this namelist dir is working, is because it's implemented in another feature variable, in an actual feature variable that is config sources. And we will be looking into that later on. So if your model is not configured to have a namelist dir, you can go to the config sources and look where your namelist is coming from actually, and modify it. Okay, so we talked already about, sorry.
More or less, but if we cover this config.
Yeah, so the feature variables are always there, right? You don't need to do anything in order to get them, basically.
The ESM, the variables with ESM tool itself, understand?
Not always, not always. There is a list, like for example, initial date is a feature variable. This namelist changes is also a feature variable. The choose blocks are feature variables too, because they trigger functionalities into ESM-Tools. They mean something to ESM-Tools. So they not always start with ESM.
And they come from the ESM-Tools, whereas the namelist dir is something that someone else had to put there at some time before. It's not in your run script, but it's somewhere on one of the lower levels, the default levels, typically for the component model or something like that.
Yes.
So basically what you are doing in the configuration files and in your run script is you are putting data there that it's meaningful for you, and then you are programming actually with this data, with the calendar operations, with the path operations, and you are feeding these variables, this data in the end to feature variables, so that ESM-Tools can understand.
Yeah.
Okay. So we were talking about the use case for the run scripts. So this is an example for FESM, in which we want to change the climate data path, because we want to use a different climate for FESM, or some different hydrology or whatever. And we know this is our name list, or actual name list config from FESM. And we see that we have the section here that is called paths, and we have a bunch of different variables, but we want to change only climate data path. The way we do that in our run script is that we, in the section of FESM, we write namelist changes, and then namelist.config, which is the name of the file, and then the section columns. You don't need the and symbol, you just put the name of the section itself, and then you can write climate data path and specify the climate data path. Also, something important is that Fortran is not case sensitive, and our parser for the namelist is not case sensitive either. So you could change this all to be lowercase, and you will still be able to modify this. And this only applies for namelists because it's a Fortran feature. For the rest, in ESM-Tools, it's all case sensitive. So in general, ESM-Tools is case sensitive. Yeah.
What is the difference between nameless changes and add nameless changes?
That's a very good question. So we are going to be seeing the add. We are going to be seeing the add feature later. I would actually recommend in run scripts always to use add nameless changes. The reason why, and I have actually a note on that later on. The reason for that is that we have something in ESM-Tools called choose blocks, which is actually a selector. And this selector in the configuration files can allow you to set up a set of configurations that have a meaning, for example, a scenario, and put the configurations on this place, and then you can actually switch in between these different selectors. Now the problem is that you cannot have duplicated variables in the same YAML file. So if you select and you don't have the add there, what is going to occur is that your default name list changes are going to be substituted completely with whatever you have inside the choose block. And you don't want that, because normally what you want when you have a choose block is you want to complement something that is more general. So what add does is complementary add dictionaries. And that means if there is no repetition of variables in the dictionary, it creates the new variable in the base dictionary, that would be name list changes. If there is a conflict, the add wins. Okay. And basically the important part here is that you want add name list changes on your run script, because you want that your run script always wins, even above the adds inside the configuration file. So best practice, always use add name list changes in the run script. In the configuration files, you always use add name list changes inside the choose blocks and outside the choose blocks when you are defining something that is general and is going to be happening, for example, date control, that is going to be happening for every type of simulation you run with this model, then you can say name list changes without the add.
Maybe for the course, we can just teach only add name list changes at first.
I think that's actually done on the exercise, but I don't remember.
Because really the name list changes should only go onto the default layers. And I think most people here are not main model developers, so they would not really work very much on the default layers. So for you, it would always be add name list changes usually. It's much safer to use it.
So the purpose for this use case is basically to make your run script as reproducible as possible. So that we are keeping the changes on the name list that you want to do inside your run script and not somewhere else. It's that clear? Maybe we can go to the next use case, which is basically in configuration files. We already discussed this. So you can define choose blocks, and then you can put these name list changes inside choose blocks, or you can define a default name list changes, and this is the default name list changes both in FESON 2.1 and 2.0. And another use case here is that, well, you see that name list changes is actually quite a nested dictionary, and it's a bit complicated. So the developers of this file, what they chose to do is, okay, I'm going to create some variable. I'm just going to do it here so that it shows up in the video. I'm going to create some variables in the root of FESON 2 on the FESON YAML. So these variables are the new, the year, leap year. You cannot see them here, but they are somewhere else at the base root here. That means that the user, these variables are often changed. And what it means is basically that the user doesn't need to use from the run script name list changes. It can just simply edit this variable, and this variable is going to be fed into the name list changes defined on the YAML. So for example, for the case before, yes, we can use name list changes from the run script if we are editing FESON and we want to change the climate data path, but we could alternatively define this climate data dir variable inside the FESON section, and then we can forget about name list changes. So when you want to make a change on a name list, the first thing I would recommend you to do is actually go to that particular model and see if there is a variable associated to that particular name list change you want to do. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me show you an example of how we will do that. Yeah.
If I also define like a climate data path myself in my run script, and it will cover the
Yes.
the one in the yeah. Yes.
Exactly. So because your run script always wins, it will overwrite this part here and it will just put the string. So add name list changes. Again, the dictionaries are merged complementarily and only the variables that are repeated are going to be in conflict and the solution is going to come through the hierarchy and your run script is always on the top of the hierarchy. And to answer your question, so let's say we want to change climate data path. Okay. So I don't know if climate data path, if I have a variable for it or not, if I have to use name list changes or not. How do I look that? So I go to ESM-Tools. And please stop me if you don't understand one of these steps. I am, of course, not connected. Really. It's been a long week. So we can go to the ESM-Tools directory. And then we can go to the config files folder. And then where should I go? We want to look at FESOM YAML, right?
Company.
So we go to the components because FESOM is a component. And then we go to FESOM. And then inside FESOM, we are going to be looking at the FESOM 2.0 YAML, for example. Okay. And we know
How
that.
do I know that my that RVCM3, for instance, is using this YAML file?
That's a very good question. So let's figure that out first. So, oh yeah, that's a very painful question.
It's a very painful question, unfortunately, but we will go through.
It's a very painful question, and this has to change, by the way, because typically what you would do is you will go to the RVCM3 file, which is this one here. So setups, and then RVCM3.
To give you the fastest answer, you sent me a message. And I tell you.
Basically, also fine with that because I don't think it will happen that often that you switch models and once you know which.
This is a very good question
Yeah.
for all the advanced users, actually. So you go to here, and you can see.
So that's where the model code is, right? Where you compile the model code into.
No. This is the file. This is a coupled configuration file.
I see, yeah.
And that means it edits all the different components. It edits all the information about the different components to make possible that they are working together in a couple simulation.
So that's the
So let's
file
go
that is
through
read
this.
when you compile.
Let's go through systematically. You start from the run script, and in the run script, it says a version of RVCM3, right? It says the model and the version. So maybe you can show this first.
I can show RVCM3. Not this one.
See, in the very top, it says setup name and version, right? And so, first of all, you know, it's a setup, right? So when you go through the hierarchy, run script, setup, component, machine. So we're going from the run script and now we look for the setup, right? Which setup are we using and which components are part of this setup? So then we go into the setup file for RVCM3.
And that's a setup file.
Yeah, right. So it's in setups, RVCM3, RVCM, right? And then you see available versions, and there's 3.1. And under the available versions, it says couplings. And this is a little bit weird because in my opinion, it could say here already which component.
Exactly.
But actually what it says is it has a list of all the components and versions. Or actually it has a like coupling thing. So then we go out.
This is very importantly a name that you're actually going to be using on a path.
Right.
So you have to go now to the couplings.
The couplings. It's like
And then this is going to be, I should have copied that. Let me do that actually.
so you copy that whole damn thing, not from 3.0, but from 3.1.
Right. And this is not working properly. Good, now it's working. Let me see if I can figure out my touchpad. Okay, then we go to
Couplings.
things, and then I paste this crazy thing, and then that's a folder, and then I paste it again, and that's a YAML file. And this is crazy, okay? We know this is crazy.
And here it says the components and the versions. Right, FISM 2.0.
So this is basically the command that you will use, for example, to actually install that component alone on that version. But anyway, again, component.
Tell that from the name that you copied though?
Yeah, the thing is that it comes exactly from here.
I put it such a way that it's the same, but it doesn't have to be, right? I can call this blah blah version 3.1 and then define the correct components. It will still work. But in order to not make it even messier than it is, I gave it the name that is exactly the components inside as well. But it doesn't have to be.
Okay.
This is absolutely horrible. We are going to change this very soon. This is basically a deprecated feature for a very different structure of ESM-Tools files back 2 years ago. That because we didn't have time, we didn't fix it yet. It's not so often that you are.
You know, we're just looking at how it actually works now. So here you see the actual version of FISM 2, right? It's FISM 2.0 that is used internally here. And so from that, I think inside the FISM 2.0, so now you go into the components, right? You know that now you're looking at the FISM component. And you're looking for where is this version of FISM defined.
But by the way, I just want to show you that this is actually a choose version. So we are having already a selector here. And again, this is an exercise later on. But this is your version of FISM that you're using. And then the question
defines the branch and where to get it from, and etc. And so you go from your run script, you find out which setup you use. From the setup, you look at the and what version of the setup. Then you go into the setup file. You look what's the coupling, what are all the components that are part of this setup and version. Inside there, it tells you what are the versions of my components. Then you look inside all your component files, where is this version defined, and then you know the.
we need to open an issue for this, so that we put it onto the cleanup phase.
I think already on the setup side, it can define all the versions, and then that makes the coupling, right?
Yeah.
Because there's nothing additional really important information on the coupling level.
Good. But basically, we know which file are we working with, which configuration file are we working with, which is FISM 2.0. So now the question is, where are my namelist changes? So you find your namelist changes. Okay, do I have here climate data path for editing these namelist changes? And yes, you have it right here, right? So this is saying, I'm gonna be changing my namelist config on the section path, and I'm gonna be changing climate data path, and the value is gonna come from this variable, okay? So we know that we have a variable declared, and you can see, if you search for this variable, that this variable is actually declared at the root of FISM. That means it's available for you also in the run script. So you can go in your run script now.
Why does it need to be? Oh, okay, yeah. Right, yeah.
So basically, you can now go to your run script inside FISM, and you can just say climate data here and name it whatever. Sorry, and give it the value of the path you want.
Okay, so what you're saying is if we want to change a certain entry of the name list, we should first see in the components file if there's already a variable assigned to it.
Because it's simpler than just going here and writing, right? It's simpler than, and someone has done the work for you. Add name list is simpler than just doing add name list.
Yeah.
Changes and then.
Okay, I understand. Yeah.
Dictionary and.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So if that's clear for everyone, I think we are at the end of this part and we can do the exercise, which is basically doing exactly that. So I think it would be pretty straightforward for you.